Welcome back to Behind the Brakes. This episode, Scott from P1Castle joins us, and man, he's built quite an empire, doing a lot of incredible things in the hobby, from a podcast to auctions to breaking, and looking forward to the National this year. He's got some big plans.
Yeah, you said it, Matt. Scott was awesome. I don't know much about F1 except for what we break, and he really brought it. I was totally engrossed in everything that he was saying. So let's get into it.
All right, folks, welcome back and buckle up. We've got Scott from P1Castle. So as I get ready to introduce you, Scott, you're everywhere, man. You're building an empire, and this is pretty exciting. So I'm serious. You've done what a lot of breakers hope to achieve. So I'm looking forward to this conversation, man. So welcome in.
Yes, welcome. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. So listen, let's start with my daily, I don't want to say fantasy because that sounds strange, but as I drive home from the corporate life in 2022, you stepped away from a life in finance to dive into this full time. We're going to get to that, but how did that feel? I got to get to that right away. How did that feel to walk away from that?
It was good because I had been doing it for a long time. Obviously, had aspirations to keep working my way up the corporate ladder. Formula One has been my favorite sport since I was a kid, thanks to my father. And I gotten very passionate about it over the last 5, 6, 7 years. So to be able to step away from, waking up at 5 a.m., taking the train 2.5 hours down to New York City, working until 6, taking the train back and everything, to be able to sit down in my house and open cards, Formula One cards specifically, for a living. Yeah, it was a good feeling. It was great. Had a nice celebratory dinner with the wife after that.
I bet, man, because I don't know if you could see my face as you were talking about the train ride in. It was hurting a little bit, man. I'm not going to lie to you.
Yeah, and those 2.5 hours, they expect you to be on the laptop too. So
you've got your phone, your laptop, you're on Teams.
Yeah.
Why aren't you here? Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So let's go back if you can. So, you're a big Formula One fan. You specialize in those cards. You said lifelong fan. Talk about that. Your dad would wake you up at 4 a.m. or what?
Yeah. So my dad actually raced Formula V, which is Formula Volkswagen. It's more of like a hobby racing series. Generally a lot of, 40s to 60s year old guys pound around in open wheel cars, though, right? I mean, they kind of actually remind me of Formula One cars back from the 50s.
Okay.
But they're racing cars. My dad did it all the time. So I grew up around racing. And he was obsessed, as I am now, with Formula One. So it would be, him out on the track kind of thinking he was a Formula One driver. And paying attention to his lap times, quality, everything. And me growing up around that. And then, watching the races on the weekend. And my parents were divorced, so I was with them every other weekend. But anytime I was there Sunday morning, yeah, he made sure I was up and we were watching the race. And it was funny because early on, when I'm 4 or 5 years old, I can't really comprehend everything that's going on. But, and I say this all the time, the thing that actually really captivated me early was the helmets of the drivers and the different flags from all the different countries. I used to sit there during the race while we're watching it, just drawing the helmets and the flags of the different drivers. So yeah, but it was, all thanks to my dad. He got me in at an early age, and I'd go to school thinking everyone wanted to talk about it. No one else knew what it was. No one cared about Formula One besides me, basically. And
I hear you, man. I tell the story, I think probably too often, but you're partying in high school. I'm the guy that we're all passed out on the floor, that wakes up at that person's house, wherever we're at. And I turned on the F1 races at 5 a.m, whatever it was. And I just kind of laid there. And of course, my friends are like, what is this? So, but I did it. I've been doing it my whole life. So I can respect that. Who was your dad's team?
So my dad was, and this was before my time, but he was a big Gilles Villeneuve guy.
Yep.
And then Ayrton Senna was his hero, 100% bona fide, exactly right there. Ayrton Senna was my dad's hero. And I don't really remember because, again, I was very young. Yeah. But I remember my stepmom telling me stories of the day that Senna passed. My dad was distraught, sobbing, and obviously Senna, legend of the sport. But it's funny because my dad vehemently hated Schumacher and Ferrari. So yeah. So those years, he
Yeah.
was angry a lot on Sundays because Schumacher did a lot of winning. So he was really into like Jacques Villeneuve, when he was battling against him, Damon Hill. And then yeah, exactly. And then he loved Vettel, which I feel like that's when I really started getting into the sport fully, because that was like kind of for me, like end of high school and college was when Vettel was doing all of his winning at Red Bull. So I became a huge Sebastian Vettel fan. My dad was a big Vettel guy. And then my dad became a Max fan. My dad was like, oh, there's this young kid, coming up. He's going to be one of the only ones to kind of like skip Formula 2 and come straight up. Everybody wants him and everything. And obviously Max took a few years to iron out being Crash Stappen. But now obviously 4-time world champion. So yeah, my dad, before he passed, loved Max. Unfortunately, he never got to see him win a championship. But a pretty, obviously sad, but a pretty cool fact is that the last race he saw was in 2020, was the year when Mercedes, DAS, dual active steering, they were destroying everybody. But the 70th anniversary Grand Prix that Max won, that was the last race my dad got to see. So kind of a cool moment that, before he passed, he got to see his guy win one more race. So, but yeah, that's basically the story. I mean, dad, super into it. Vettel was my guy, Max, but Vettel will probably always be my favorite. I named my son Sebastian. So.
There you go. Well, that's kind of a cool story. So you got to keep it in the family. And so when 2020 comes around, obviously you're still watching it, and Topps comes out with the F1 product. I mean, that had to shake you to your core.
So, it's actually interesting because I collected cards a ton as a kid.
Okay.
I actually remember I had this tiny little store on my walk to and from school called Triple Crown Sports Cards. And there was this old guy that worked in it. And I used to take my $1.60 that I would get for lunch, and I would pocket it. And I would try to mooch off my friends, and I would save up for a few days. And then I would go in, I would probably spend 2 hours looking at the showcase, looking at all the different stuff, and then buying ultimately one pack or like one card, right? And it's funny because I remember at the time being like very anxious, like, oh, this guy probably hates me because I come spend all this time in here and then I leave with, one pack or one something. But now looking back, you probably enjoyed the company, at a little store like that. But yeah, so I used to be into basketball, baseball, football, all the sports I played as a kid. But I had kind of fallen out of card collecting, right? Outside of like a little Pokemon at some point, really. I was out of card collecting. So when the Formula 1 cards came out, that was actually like my re-entry into card collecting. Because I was like, oh, wow, this is crazy. And the first thing I saw actually was Turbo Attacks. And I was like, oh, this is cool. They have like little play cards, and I bought like a couple packs or something. And then I obviously learned about the Dynasty set that came out first, and then Chrome and Sapphire shortly thereafter. And obviously with COVID, everything got delayed. So 2020 ended up coming out, between February and March, really, of 2021. And so I remember I bought my first box of Chrome and Sapphire probably in like late March or early April. And again, I was so far out of cards, man. I had no clue. I didn't even know the hobby was a thing at the time.
Oh,
I had no idea that there was this massive collecting world. I was just a really big Formula 1 fan, and I collected cards as a kid. So I grabbed it. And I still remember 2020 Chrome, I opened a box and I got a George Russell, and it had the nice, silver sheen on the front. I was like, oh, nice. It's refractor. This is awesome. And I turn it over. It doesn't say refractor. I was like, oh, well, this sucks. I guess it's just a regular card. Turns out it's an image variation, and it was a very expensive card, and it was a great card, but I had no idea. So yeah, it was funny because it's just those early, I love things when they're brand new. It's like that different feeling, right? Like at this point, I've opened hundreds of cases, thousands and thousands and thousands of packs. And when you do it for the first time and you're really just, going through it like you're a kid again, it's special. So yeah, I still remember the exact moment I opened my first box of Chrome and Sapphire. And at that point, I was only looking for Max Verstappen cards. And I opened an entire box Sapphire and didn't get a single card. And I was upset.
That's how
Well,
it
you got
goes.
you got an image variation though, and you're like, whatever.
Throw it to the side. So, okay, you didn't know that the hobby was the hobby.
Yep.
So when did that moment happen? And you kind of put, oh wait, I can follow my passion and do something with this.
Yeah, so kind of shortly after I'd opened a couple boxes, like, all right, well, now I want more boxes, right? So I end up, like, at the time I was using Facebook a lot. And so I was like, okay, like, are there any Formula One collecting groups out here or anything? And I found a few, and there are some still today. It's really like 2 major ones. And so I became very active on there. I learned that braking was a thing. I'd never even heard of braking. Ironic. But I had never even heard of it. And one of the pages that I was on was actually primarily like UK based, even though we're over here in the States, which made sense to me because Formula One, it's born and raised in the UK. I joined my first break with someone in the UK, and I'm not going to reveal who it was because I remember doing it and the person was kind of mispronouncing all the names. And just flipping through the stuff, and I was like, all right, well, this isn't the experience I had hoped for. I was like, I want to do this. And this was also, probably about 7 months or so after my dad had passed. And so me and my dad used to talk about Formula One every single day. Even if there was a 2-week gap between a race, every single day there was something to talk about. My dad gave me so much of the historic facts too. It would have been amazing for him to be around, be on the streams nowadays. But we used to talk all the time. So when he was gone, like there was a huge void for Formula One specifically. And I remember talking to my wife about it a bit. And like we had a conversation. She's like, hey, like, I can talk to you about Formula One, here for you, but like I'm not your dad. Like I'm not going to be able to reciprocate, right? So I was like, you know what? Yeah. I was like, why don't I try opening these cards, And I was like, the set commemorates the 2019 season, right? All of the Grand Prix winner and driver of the day, they're all a year behind. And I was like, I know every single thing that happened in every single race. I was like, why don't I, open these and talk through them? And so I started breaking and I remember first time I bought one box.
Yep.
$550. I filled my break $450. So I lost money and the time and everything it was going to take. But to me, really, it was just like a cathartic experience because I sat there and I actually still have some of my old openings on YouTube, 35 minutes for one box. And people used to joke they call it a story in every pack. Because I would literally open a pack and I'd be like, oh, Lando Norris, driver of the day, 2019 in Spa. Yeah, I remember this race. He was doing great. And then his engine went out like right at the end and it didn't get to finish the race, was classified, whatever. And so I just talked to all the details of all the cards and the drivers and everything. And it was a long format type breaking style. It's definitely not kind of what I do primarily today. I'd love to get back to doing some of that, But yeah, so that's how I got started. I just, would take one box at a time, do it really slow, usually lose money. But for me, it was just, again, it was just a hobby. It was just having fun, talking to other people about Formula One and kind of filling that gap that had been lost with my father.
Yeah. So with, like how you said, you found some Facebook groups and you kind of came that way first. When you did your first break, was that through Facebook? Was it through YouTube? How did you stream them? Because, platforms that we have today like weren't yet available really.
Yeah, absolutely. So I used YouTube. So I would post it on Facebook in like a couple different groups and it would have the price. And if someone would claim it, I'd put in their name and then like mark it as claimed on the other one. And like I was, going back and forth all day. I'm on work meetings. I'm like, oh, someone just took the Racing Point spot. After I, filled the break, then I would make a group chat and be like, hey, okay, we're going to run this on YouTube, Tuesday night at 8:00. And I would go live and, oh my gosh, ask my wife because there were major growing pains with those early YouTube streams. So many times, like OBS, camera's not working, like nothing's working. I'm throwing things all around. I'm supposed to be live in 1 minute. What's going on? So
you can
a lot
feel
of
all the pressure coming on. You're like, oh, you're
Mhm.
starting to sweat. You're like, this is not good. And then
Absolutely. And
light
it
goes
was
on.
funny because I was so used to being on camera, doing Zoom calls and everything and finance all day long. But then I get in front of YouTube, I'm like, all right, what we got here. So yeah, it took a little while to kind of find my cadence.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with the knowledge you've got, I had to imagine that came pretty quick, right?
Yeah, I mean, and I really kind of relied on that a lot. It took me a little bit to learn how to, monitor the comments, look at the chat, be actively talking to folks. So a lot of it kind of was just like storytelling, really, between like, races me and my father had gone to, we had watched stuff that happened in the 2019, 2020 seasons. And then obviously when we were primarily opening this stuff, it was 2021. And that was, one of the best seasons ever in terms of championship battle. So there was always something to talk about, which was great. So a lot easier than 2023. That was a tough season to talk through because Max was just winning every single race.
Well, we won't talk about 21 because I don't agree with what happened. So we'll just we don't talk politics on the show. Okay. So you agree with me.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I've always been someone, and it goes back to, I think I kind of took this from my father, who I like to see someone get knocked off the pedestal, right? So, I mean, I won't deny I was rooting for Max throughout that season. And actually, my birthday is July 6th. And my wife and I had gone to a nice little hotel down in Maryland. And we're like, oh, Silverstone Grand Prix is on. And that's the one where you remember Lewis, hit Max. Max goes into the wall, crashes. You did not want to talk to me that day. That was a rough day.
So much for the vacation.
Exactly. But I can only imagine, kind of shoe on the other foot, obviously, with the last race, the way that ended. I mean, that was ridiculous, right? Was the worst way for what was like the best season of all time to end. So yeah, I mean, I'm happy that Max won, but not obviously in the way that it happened. So yeah, unfortunate.
Not that way.
And I mean, that race, that season, I'll be debated for forever, right? There'll never be an end to that.
That's all right. Lewis wins his ninth this year, so I'm fine with it. You said a couple things earlier that I want to go back to because I think it spans the hobby. You talked about opening packs and cards, and as an adult, takes you back to being. RJ talks about it a lot. Takes you back to being that kid. And, I mean, I think your story is magnified a little bit with the relationship you and your dad had around the sport, but is that kind of what made you want to take it another step further and like really make this a part of your life?
Yeah,
in a bigger way.
Sorry.
In a bigger way. I mean,
yeah,
yeah.
Definitely. So I mean, I had always enjoyed opening packs, right? Like, even when I was working in finance or even before that, when I was in college, go home, what do we got here? Pick up a random pack of basketball or football or maybe even Pokemon, and just open it. I didn't do too much buying and selling. I did a little bit of that with Pokemon for a bit as just like something to keep me busy. But yeah, I mean, it's just really fun to open packs, and like it does kind of bring you back being a kid. Like I actually can still recall some of my first ever packs in like fourth grade, of like NBA hoops and all this like random stuff way back in the day. I actually remember I still have the card. I should have brought it over here. I only, nowadays it's like all these insane cards, and obviously if you're a breaker, the volume you're opening, is crazy. I never hit anything of value as a child ever. But to me, it was just like, hey, you're just getting your favorite player. And I didn't really know that much about like card values. Like I think I borrowed my stepbrother's Beckett magazine once, and I'm like going through like, oh, this card's 50 cents. That's awesome. I can buy like a pack of Skittles.
There you go.
But I still remember I pulled a Keith Van Horn.
Oh, yeah.
Keith Van Horn, just a relic, right? So a piece of his jersey. And I thought that was the coolest thing. I was like, oh my God, this is a piece of like a jersey that he wore, or maybe didn't, who knows. But that for me was amazing. And like, I kind of knew who he was, but then I became a Keith Van Horn fan because I was like, oh, I got this cool card, I'm going to watch it. And then, his career fizzled out. But yeah, so that was cool. And that feeling is pretty fun, which wanted got me back into wanting to open packs
Yeah.
over and over and over. I will say it's a little different now that I do it full time. And I used to, when I was doing it on the side, when I still had my finance job and I was breaking on the side, I would open boxes for myself all the time. Like I would spend a lot of time on Zoom calls. I would do my meeting, my part of the meeting, and I would turn off my camera and I would sit there, open a $4,000 2020 Sapphire box for myself.
You get a call from your boss mid-break. You're like, come on.
They're like, can we get those numbers? You're like, wait, what's that? Sorry, what? Yeah.
Be like, yeah, I just hit a Total Wolf 101 Pat Barrage.
101.
That's my number.
Those numbers, Lewis Hamilton.
But now it's a little different now that it's full time, because I actually don't get to open that many boxes for myself anymore. And part of it is because, it's almost a lose-lose. Because if I open a box for myself and there's no good cards in there, like, okay, well, I just lost money. If I open cards for myself and there are good cards in there, it's like, well, I could have hit that for somebody else, in the community who buys in the breaks, part of the P1Castle community. So I very rarely open stuff for myself now, which is a shame. And every now and then I will indulge, if it's a special occasion or something. But I do like to, even if I'm opening for myself, do it on camera, because part of what makes the hobby awesome, and really the reason that I think breaking is a thing, is because of the community aspect, right? It's so much more fun to open cards with other people, whether it's virtual or in person. So if I'm opening cards for myself, or even if, someone is doming cases or boxes, right, doing personals, I'd rather do those on camera, on stream, because then, 100 other people can join in on the experience. And you pull something crazy and you have no idea how many times like people are like, oh man, I was in that stream. Like, I remember that, like, and they're a part of it, and they truly are. And I have some plans in the future, and, stuff is still in the works and it's not quite there yet, but to kind of push that envelope, right? Because we want people to feel like, if you're in the stream and you're part of the community, you are part of everything. And, we did a event last year at the National. We actually did a collab with former Formula One driver Logan Sargent. And so he sent us his racing gloves and a Nomex and a bunch of signed, kind of driver cards, not cards you get out of a pack, but the ones they send out.
Yeah.
And we did a giveaway where, folks that were in the break would get something, but then folks that were watching the break would also get something, because, we want to kind of, push that to the next stage in terms of just being a part of the event, rather than, just watching it. You can watch it and like maybe you can get something too. And it's, kind of like giveaways are a way to do that as well. But, we'll have to see. But I would say kind of watch that space, because I think that's going to be kind of the next evolution of, breaking and community spaces.
Yeah. All right. So you've touched on that where you are now with the, you get stuff from Logan Sargent, you're at National. But take us back to those initial breaks. And again, any tips you have for folks listening to this and that want to get into breaking? You've been there, you've done that. I think you told us about, you started with one box, you lost some money, but talk to us through that and maybe some tips for folks listening.
So the biggest thing, honestly, the biggest thing I'm going to tell everybody, if you're trying to get into breaking, is expect to lose money for a while. Like, seriously, I think I lost money or broke even for the first 6 months of doing breaking. And part of that is, listen, if you're new, there's all these options out there, right? And every month that goes by, the breaking space becomes more and more saturated, right? There's just more people doing it. There's tons of people doing it. There's different channels. There's Fanatics Live. There's Whatnot. There's Loop. There's YouTube. There's all of these different options, right? So if someone is sitting there on a Friday night, like, oh, I want to join a break, there's a million different options, right? So if you're a new breaker, how do you make people choose you instead of someone else, right? And the first thing you can do, the easiest thing you can do, is just have better pricing, right? So you gotta expect to lose money. Like, that's how I started. When I first started, my pricing was just better than everyone else's. I looked at what everyone else was selling stuff for, and I was like, all right, well, I'm new, I'm doing this. People buy with that person regularly. They're used to buying with them. So the only way they're going to buy with me instead is if it's cheaper. So that's the first thing I'll tell you is do it on the side while you still got, a full-time income and everything, and build up your community through cheaper pricing. Customer service is a huge, huge thing. Don't push yourself too far. That was one of the things that I learned early is when I was doing one box, it's really easy. Right after the stream, you can instantly sort, package all of that and get it out the next day because it's one box. I remember I did my first case and I was like, oh my God. I was like, there's so many more cards. This is exactly what have I done? And so you want to start small to be able to provide that, next day shipping or 2-day shipping, customer service, reach out to folks, put in, freebies, put in, different things that can show people where you are. Like if you're ripping on Whatnot and Instagram and YouTube and you run a break on YouTube, send a little insert. Like I have these little inserts that I'll throw in packages that give everyone, here's my Instagram info, here's my Whatnot info, and all that kind of stuff. So, get yourself out there and just do it, right? And this actually reminds me of something I think Gary Vee said, right? Is just hit record, right? Because, you might not have people watching you until 3 years down the road, but you got to start somewhere. And, now I think honestly, it's easier than ever to just start. You can go on Whatnot, you can do single streams. You don't necessarily have to break when you first start. You can build up a community just by selling singles and, go on there, throw singles up there, do giveaways, and then start working in a box. Maybe you're going to do a single show and be like, hey, I got one box. So you guys want to do a random team? And again, focus on kind of having competitive pricing and just having a good experience. You don't need a top of the line camera or microphone or anything. You can do most of it with just an iPhone. So if you've got an iPhone there, just kind of map out, I used to have show notes for all of my stuff. I literally used to have like up in front of me, like topics that I would go through and I would kind of mentally check them off. So, try to do that to continue to be engaging and then just keep doing it. Consistency is key. I will say consistency is the biggest thing. And I remember there was a time in Formula One where, we obviously had a huge boom, COVID bubble of 2021 and then 2022, and then crypto burst and like everything went down. And I remember like late 2022, early 2023, there was nobody breaking Formula One. Like I may have been one of the only people still doing it. And it wasn't making crazy money or anything, but you gotta be consistent, right? And it's the same thing. I'm sure you guys are, learning when you're doing like YouTube podcasts. We have that other podcast we do, and we try as much as we can to be consistent because that's how you get viewers. That's how you build community. So yeah, I think that the main things are, competitive pricing, consistency, and, customer service and engagement is kind of how I would say, those are the building blocks to a successful breaking business.
So then actually how you just started off and how you're saying like, oh, before different platform, now there's all these other platforms available. Like, were you building a following then? And like, was it difficult to transfer them and be like, hey, we're going to start streaming over here now instead, and getting them to follow you, make sure that all that was updated? Because, you're putting that time and that effort already. So you don't want to miss out.
Yeah. So I was like, initially I was all on Instagram I was all on Facebook and YouTube, but this is when I was still kind of just like building up. And then I remember, I ran a random team break because I had done everything was driver or team, right? You pick your driver, you pick your team, whatever. I ran one random team break and the Facebook group kicked me. And they were like, oh no, it's random. That's gambling. We can't do it in the UK. So you can't be in here and everything. And there was actually like a huge uproar in the community on there. And they brought me back in and they wanted me to be like the breaking monitor and everything for the group. And I was like, okay, no, we're not doing that. But like, I'll come back in. But at that moment, I was like, all right, so like this isn't a long-term solution then. If there's like, people that are just gonna on a whim, do something like that. So I moved over to Instagram. And actually there were more people breaking Formula One on Instagram than there were on Facebook anyways at the time. So this was probably middle to end of 2021. I want to say like September, October 2021 is when I moved over to Instagram, and very quickly built up my following there. And like that is where I really, really grew, was on Instagram. On Facebook, it's just, my name. It was Scott James was on Facebook, right? And so when I moved over to Instagram, I made not the P1 Castle, but I made Pirates Card Castle was actually my initial business name,
Right.
which has nothing to do with Formula One, but it was just a name that I had at the time. And so I built that up on Instagram. And recently, it was actually about a year and a month ago, I joined Fanatics Live. So at the beginning of kind of 2024, I joined Fanatics Live. And that was kind of okay, now you're bringing your community over. I remember having conversations with Fanatics about it and everything. And us, took a little bit for us to see eye to eye on everything, because of course, I'm moving over to a platform. They want me to kind of do everything on there, and I'm like, listen, my breaks fill right away on Instagram. I don't need to be on the platform, and I'm bringing my entire community over onto your platform. So like, there needs to be a little give and take, and so we got that worked out and everything. And now I do some stuff on Fanatics Live. I do some stuff on Instagram. And that's primarily, where my community lies, and kind of everyone comes back and forth. I'll pick up new folks on Instagram. I'll pick up new folks on Fanatics, but, we have plans for things like I'm probably going to have it. I actually just put a community poll up recently, actually on Instagram of, where would folks want to kind of gather, Discord or an Instagram group chat or forums. Like, I don't know if you guys ever used to go on like the blowout forums or anything like that, right? So I grew up, I remember being on forums a lot. So no, didn't get many votes for the forum, but a lot of people wanted Discord, a lot of people wanted Instagram group chat. So we're probably going to do both, right? So I'll probably have like an Instagram group chat where, the folks that are primarily using Instagram can, communicate with me, and we can have a community over there. And then Discord where, folks from kind of any different platform that are willing to, put another app on their phone or computer, et cetera, can hang out. And what's cool about Discord is that, I'd love to do like live race watch alongs and like stuff like that. And obviously you can't do that on an Instagram group chat. So yeah, so it's
that'll be interesting to see the licensing of that as you're is that considered rebroadcasting? I don't know. So
yeah, that's a good point. It might be something where, yeah, I mean, honestly, it would probably be something where we're all just in the channel and we're all separately watching it at the same time and just talking about it. Because it'll get shut down real quick if I'm showing it.
If you're the guy. Yeah, no, these are great ideas. And so you clearly, the consistency, plugging away, just grinding at it, staying faithful to it. One of the things, product is always something people struggle with, getting your hands on product, especially as you're growing, especially with the price points now. How did you work through that as you've grown? Obviously, relationships, I imagine, as you grew, were easier, but on those initial stages.
Yeah. So, I mean, early on, right, it was really one box at a time type stuff. So, I wasn't shelling out crazy amounts. I actually still remember buying my first case of 2020 Chrome for $6,500. Initially they were like $1,500. Now they're over $20,000. Yeah. So, I remember buying and I was like, oh God, I'm like, oh man, this is a crazy purchase. I can't believe I'm doing that. And like, I was, like I said, I was relatively new to the hobby, and a lot of people are like, we do friends and family here. And I'm like, oh, this is nerve wracking to send this money unprotected. But, I don't necessarily advise that, but if you trust someone, but right. Anyways, I would say honestly, while I was growing, a lot of it was like rotating credit cards. Literally, I had 3 different credit cards that I would like put product on. And then while I'm paying that one off, I'm putting product on another one, and I'm paying that off and I'm putting product on another one. Like I would always make sure, and again, not financial advice, but like make sure you pay your credit card in full. Do not carry a balance if you can help it. And that's why I would use multiple. But yeah, I mean, it was a lot of just like, hey, doing whatever I can to make sure I had product. And with 2020 Chrome and Sapphire, as expensive as it was, like it was I'd buy 4 boxes, and that's $16,000 if it was Sapphire, right? So it was tough, and it really took kind of using 3 different credit cards and just rolling through them to make sure I always had product. But then, as I grew and as new products came out, that actually helped a lot because the newer products were so much cheaper, right? A case was the price of a box of 2020. So it was a lot easier to do that. And I was doing fairly well in finance and stuff. So I had, quite a bit of savings saved up. And so I had some capital to draw on. I know, not everyone is in that situation. So, credit cards are your friend, but do not let them get out of control. Like, seriously, I don't want anyone to get into a bad habit. You really got to stay on top of that. But that's what I had to do. I had to use them to make sure I always had product on the table. And then as I grew, I developed better relationships with folks. So, like I know the owner of Blowout. I know the owner of DA Card World. A lot of the time was because like I was one of maybe 2 people that were buying 2020 wax from them, right? So then I got to the point where I'm calling them on the phone and it's, okay, how many cases do you have? And working out a deal and doing a bank wire for some of it and like giving the rest after I broke it, like you obviously it takes a while to build those relationships, but as you do, you get more benefits. And then when I joined Fanatics Live, things definitely changed a lot because I went from having to buy everything secondary market to now I get an allocation. I get a direct breaker allocation. Now it's not, it's funny because I remember when I got my allocation, I talked to my wife. I was like, this is life-changing. This is life-changing. Like the margins are just gonna be way different. I'm gonna be able to, drop my pricing so much. Like this is crazy. Direct allocations, like 50%, 40% off. No, it's not. I don't know if it's like they don't give as good pricing to the breakers as they do, or if, Fanatics took over Tops recently, right? And maybe they looked at that and they were like, yeah, we're going to take more of the pie, right? So I really don't know because I first came in, but, it's a little bit less, but it's definitely not, what I was expecting. But it is nice to have that allocation. Now, I will say, I got a bit ahead of myself. My first year, they offered me 70 cases. I took all of them of Chrome 2023. I took every single case and, you got to pay that stuff. I was on net 15. So I had to pay that within 15 days. And I'm, I break a lot, but I don't break 70 cases in 15 days. And I think I went through about 40 of them in 15 days. Wow. But, I'm still sitting there with 30 cases unopened and a pretty big bill. So that was a wake-up call for me, especially because then a month later, I bought 40 more cases from them, and then the price tanked. And then they were way cheaper on the secondary market. Listen, you learn a lot of lessons doing this in the business. When you make mistakes is when you learn the most. And some of it, I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to get 100 cases, so I have cases to open throughout the whole year because usually the price goes up. Well, price doesn't always go up. So yeah, it's a little bit of live and learn.
Where do you put 70 cases? I mean, hey, Seb, move over.
So behind me, and I actually have, and here, I'll move the camera for just a second, and you can see like some of what.
Oh, there you go. All right. There you
go. So we kind of just like put them down our basement. Now, granted, I did not used to have this. We just got this done at the end of last year. So we have like our entire basement. It was like semi-finished in our house. So we got it completely finished and the entire business is down here now. And I used to run it out of my office upstairs, which we're in the process of turning into Sebastian's playroom. It still hasn't been done yet, but that's on my honey-do list. So I remember when I had all those cases, I had them in our foyer. So you'd come in, you'd walk into the house, and right next to the stairs, there's literally like 80 cases. Like I had them in like, probably like 9 cases in each like row, and it went up like 7 or 8 different rows, and it was a big case.
Shout out to your wife.
Yeah,
salute to her.
Someone walks in, they're just like, "Oh, you moving? You must be moving. You have so many boxes." You're like, "No, nope, this is all for me.
Just cases of cards. Unopened.
Just pictures of men. That's all this is. All
Exactly.
pictures of men.
And now this year, one woman.
And a woman. That's awesome, too. All right, so before we jump into what you're doing now, because you're doing some incredible stuff. I mean, you just finished up that 30-day auction, and you crushed it. So congratulations. But real quick, before we get into that, for breakers, one last thing, your setup. How has that evolved, your setup for breaks?
Yeah, so it actually hasn't evolved a ton yet. It is going to. The whole idea of like coming down here and then building everything out was so we could do that. But we made a couple missteps along the way, and we've got to fix that, which I haven't done yet. But the biggest thing is lighting. You've got to have good lighting. And so the biggest thing that I did was I ended up buying Elgato. I think they're like key lights on the side, and I have them. They're on me right now. And that just makes like the picture so much better. And giving yourself a wide space, like I used to do when I first started, and you can see this on my YouTube videos, I'm literally doing it on a like 2-foot desk. So like I do not have any space, and like it's my computer monitor, but there's space in between there so you can look through it. You could see like my cat in the background and like the couch over there and like my wife walking back and forth, and you could hear the TV going on, and people be like, hey, can you tell her to turn the TV down? Like, like it was a lot. So really it's just about having like, make sure you have a dedicated space. Like even if it's just like a desk somewhere, it's obviously easiest to do it just into a wall, right? I don't kind of recommend doing it the way I had initially started, where you're just kind of doing it with air. So into the wall is good. Make sure you have a nice backdrop. And one of the most cost-efficient things, and I don't necessarily do it right now, but I will say one of the most cost-effective ways to have a good background for yourself, like if you have a face cam, green screen. Literally just you can buy a $20 green screen, and then you can put anything behind you. And if you look at a ton of like the huge breakers, right? Like I may be big in the F1 space, but on the whole, like I'm still small fry. If you look at all of the massive breakers, they all use green screens because it's cheap, it's affordable, and it's easy to use. Like I actually get blown away, and then remind myself that it's similar. Like you look at someone like Blez, right? Blez, like, RJ, you're into baseball. I'm sure you know Blez. Like they're huge. And you look at their setup, it's just a small little room with a green screen behind who's ever doing it, and they're breaking into a wall. Like it's really not, you don't need all the bells and whistles. Yeah. Don't spend the money on all the bells and whistles. Just make sure you've got a clean space to do it with good lighting. If you're going to invest money in anything, invest it in lighting.
And that goes to your point about just getting started. There's no excuse. We've all got phones. Just jump on. I mean, if take the chance and get it in there. And like you've evolved, I think our other guests have evolved. I mean, Shake, I'm sure he's got 5 TV screens and 47 phones. I mean, and the guy does an incredible job. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
And that's a great tip.
And I got a question on like your consistency side, right? Like obviously when you're starting off, because you're full-time now, right? So this is like the shindig. So when you're like starting off, at what point were you just doing like, one a week, or, were you trying to do 2? Like, and then when did you decide to go like, hey, there's time and to grow this a little bit? And then at the same time, like we were talking about shipping earlier, like you have to account for that, right? Because that's almost the length of a show is sometimes almost the length that you're shipping. So.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I feel like, honestly, people who don't break, that is one of the things that people just don't realize. The time that goes into, sleeving, top loading, sorting, shipping, like people just see the stream and, that's it. And it's like, oh, okay, cool. And like, listen, not going to beat around the bush. There's people that love breakers and like what they do for the hobby, and like there's people that don't, right? It's a very divisive thing, and I feel like people that are on the other side that don't like them, they just see it as like, oh, they're the reason wax costs more, and like they just make this money and all they're doing is opening cards for other people, and like that's it. But like there's so much that goes behind it, and like I know a lot of different breakers that invest a lot of money in their business outside of just buying product and opening it, right? So but as for your question in terms of, I started out at 1 a week. Like that was all I was willing to kind of do. And again, like financially, I had like this tiny little budget set for myself, that I was like, okay, I'm only going to spend this much on it. So it was tough for me to do more than that. Then I eventually went up to, 2 a week because I wanted to just get myself out there more. And 2 a week is still, kind of manageable. I will say it all depends on how big of a break you do, right? If you're doing a box, you could probably do a box, 5 days a week, because right after the break, you can kind of take care of the sorting and the shipping, the packaging and everything. But if you're doing a case like it's tough. I think at a minimum, you want to be on at least once a week. That is like kind of consistent, because you can carve out like a day and a time that folks are going to get used to. This is when they're on, right? Yeah. And try to be as consistent as you can with that same day and that same time. And now you can't always do that, but I'd say the time and the day is important. And if you add another one, try to space it. Don't go live on Sunday and Monday. Try to go live on Sunday and Wednesday or something, right? Space it out a little bit. But yeah, time is key. And then when I decided to kind of go a little bit bigger, really it was, I'm a finance guy. So there was a point at which I was like, okay, like numbers make sense. Like if I really start to try to scale this, like I could potentially like make it a full-time job, and I would have to do it a lot more. But if I'm not working, my job, I was working 60, sometimes 70 hours a week, right, in finance. So like if I could free up all that time, and of course you can't just be breaking for 70 hours because there's certain times that people want to buy, but it frees up all that time to do the sorting, to do the shipping, to do everything else, the advertising, the marketing. So I was thinking about it. And then we went for my 33rd birthday, my wife actually got us tickets to the Zandvoort Grand Prix, right? Because I was a Max guy. He was number 33 in 2021. So he was actually number 1 when we went there. But, that was his old number. So for my 33rd birthday, we went to Zandvoort. First time we had ever gone over to, the Netherlands, and we stayed at Amsterdam, the whole thing. And we got championship tickets. And so championship, you're in the championship club, which is like a nice air conditioned place, which I need because me living in upstate New York, if I go anywhere hot, I'm melting.
I'm done.
So, we're in the AC, and then we get one paddock tour, like a guided paddock tour. You get to go into the paddock. And so at the time, again, I was known as Pirates Card Castle. And I had my brake mat. I had the idea. I had actually gone. I had my brake mat, my backpack, and I had cards. And I was like, oh, I'm going to have like all the drivers sign cards. This will be great. And I realized very quickly that was like not going to happen because I got Lance Stroll actually to sign a card. But then like Carlos Sainz was coming, and like they're doing their job, right? They're in the paddock, they're going somewhere very quickly. They don't have time to sit there and do whatever. So I'm like fumbling, like trying to, where's the card of this driver, and like get the pen out and everything. And like by the time that's happening, like they're gone. So I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna have them sign my brake mat. So I ended up going through, and Lando was walking by, and I was like, oh man. And I had seen like Stroll at the time. I'd seen like Zhou Guan Yu, Yuki, so like some decent drivers, are like none of my like favorites. So then Lando comes through. I was like, oh, like Lando, would you sign my brake mat? And so he was like, yeah, sure, mate, and like signed it, gave a really good signature. And I was like, oh my God, this was like an epic experience. I'm so happy right now. And I had brought 2020 Sapphire box with me to the Netherlands to do like a break in the Netherlands and to write off the entire trip. And so
hey, that's business right there. That's business 101. Yeah.
So so then we do that break later that night. Lando Norris 1 of 1, Pad Paraja out of 2020. And I remember after I got off that live, I turned to my wife and I was like, I'm going to do it. Like, this is like, if there's any sign, like the fact that like Lando signed my brake mat, and then right after we pull one of his 1 of 1s and everything, I was like, I was on the fence about it, but like, I'm doing it. I'm going to go full time. And so like, that was like the moment for me, because it was like building up to it where I was thinking about it. And then like, that was just like, okay, I'm going to do it. And also my wife was 7 months pregnant at the time. So I was like, listen, I kind of got to try it now, because if I do it for 3 months and it doesn't work, then, I'll go back into finance, corporate world, or whatever, right? But I don't want to, be sitting there with having the baby and everything and then trying to find a job and all that. So I decided to kind of take the leap, and things, obviously have worked out. It was a little stressful for a little while, but we got there in the end. But that was kind of the defining moment.
Things have worked out, I would say so. Let's talk about the the 30-day auction. Man.
Yeah, so we we've worked really closely with Fanatics on Formula One in general. So because I've been such a massive F1 fan, I'm not just someone who kind of breaks it for the money, right? There's a lot of other breakers who do Formula One in addition to all the other sports because someone wants to buy it, they'll put it on the table. They don't really know the sport, and that's not to knock them, right? You've got to give your buyers what they want, right? But for me, I'm so passionate about the sport, and always have been, that I think, Fanatics and Topps kind of saw that, and, they talked to me about, things to put in the product or ways to make things better. What is the community thinking about certain things? For instance, I suggested vertical jumbos in Dynasty. We got them this year, and they're very popular. I suggested kind of focusing on helmet type cards, and we've got helmet collection. And listen, I'm not going to take sole credit for them. I'm sure there's a lot of very talented people that work at Topps Fanatics that are coming up with these ideas as well. But this is the feedback I'm giving. We have a really good relationship. I have a good relationship with, the brand manager and director, with the product director, the marketing director, and we talk, pretty frequently. And so being on Fanatics Live, I've then gotten a relationship with that side of it, with Fanatics Live and then Fanatics Collect, because, we run singles and we've had some stuff go on Fanatics Collect. So we kind of got this idea of, okay, one of the best times to kind of buy and sell cards is preseason, right? It's for every sport, right? So it's the biggest, okay, you're the most unsure about what is your driver and other sports, the player going to do. Are they going to be the next Patrick Mahomes? Are they going to be the next Lewis Hamilton or Max Verstappen, right? And hope springs eternal, before the season, right? So you can kind of buy whoever you want, and you get to go into the season thinking, okay, this is who I'm rooting for. So we decided to do an auction before the season. And, I kind of told some people about it, and then other people heard about it, and they're like, oh, I want to put cards in. And I'd started with, okay, we're going to do 100 card auction, end up being over 200 cards that we had in there. And at the end of the day, so it ran over 2 weeks. So it was a 2-week auction. And, with Fanatics Collect, what they generally do is they have their premier auctions, they have their weekly auctions, but they made this a custom auction. So you could actually go in and directly link to just every card in this auction. You didn't have to, normally if you're on Golden, if you're on Fanatics Collect, any of those places, if you're looking for Formula One, it's like finding a needle in a haystack in their premier auctions, in their weekly auctions. It's not a ton of stuff. So I wanted to make sure that it was, hey, you got to be able to link in and go directly to it and see every card. And so, very successful. I think, I released the stats of the auction a few days ago, and, using Card Ladder Pro 130 point, we compared comps on every single card. I think I probably spent 4 to 5 hours comping every single card, and we came in at about 103.4% of comps. So B comps, which is always good to see. There were definitely, and as with every auction, winners and losers. The 2023 Echalenza product got rocked. Literally, I think we were at 50% of comps. It was terrible. And, obviously I was very, remorseful, felt bad for the folks that had cards in this auction. Luckily, there was only 5 cards total in 2023 Echalenza. But it's never fun to sell something for a loss. So that was unfortunate. On the other side of it, whoever bought them, ends up getting a good buy. So there was stuff like that. We sold a Lewis Hamilton 2020 orange autograph, PSA 7 for $25,200. The most recent comp for that was a 6, which obviously would sell for less, but that was only $16,000. So kind of, a 7 you would expect to maybe go for 20 at that point. So that definitely did did really well. And then we had other cards, again, that did great, other cards that didn't. But on the whole, the auction was successful. And we learned a lot of things, right? Like no more Echelenza in those auctions. That's a product that kind of caters to an international market, and Fanatics Collect is primarily, US-based collectors able to bid on that stuff. And then I'd probably, if I did it again or the next time we do it, we probably will have less cards. It's just a lot of cards to keep track of, and like one of the best examples of that is we sold a PSA 8 Orange Wave Mercedes logo, and we sold a PSA 9 Orange Wave Mercedes logo. The 8 sold for more. And that is just an example of, okay, so the 9, it just got missed. It got missed by whoever's bidding on the different cards. So I think in the future, we'll limit it to, 50-ish cards, maybe like 2 pages worth, because 2 pages, it's not hard to see everything. When we had 9 pages, that's a lot of cards to put in there. But overall it was great.
Well, I mean, you're certainly crushing it. And, you've also got a podcast that we've got to recognize as fellow podcasters, the Carbon Cardboard. I actually listened to, you shot me a note this morning, and so I listened on my way home from work. I haven't finished it yet, but it's awesome. So we're going to be putting all of your links to everything you're doing, the different places people can find you in our show notes. So the podcast, you guys got to keep that up. That's a lot of fun to listen to, especially again for an F1 guy, and we can learning from you guys and how you're doing things. So
and that's only listen to it if you're an F1 fan, because that's all we talk about, right? It's F1 cards, and I think we've been doing it for about a year. And like I was joking with you before, you're probably listener number 21. But we have some folks that love it, and it's not a huge crowd, but the folks that like it do really like it. So we're going to keep doing it, and consistency is key. We try to be as consistent as we can. And we actually had a bit of a shift, when we initially did it. And this was the brainchild of the Cards Formula. There used to be a podcast. It was me, Q3 Cards, the other co-host of the Carbon Cardboard podcast, and two other folks. And we did that for a while. And then, life happened for everybody. Life happens. And so Brian and I ended up being the two that kind of had the time. I obviously doing it full time was like, I've got time. I can make time for it. And Brian was able to do it. So we started the Carbon Cardboard podcast, and it was a mixture of Formula One, like we were talking about the races and some about the cards. And we had a little bit of like a light bulb, I want to say like 10, maybe 15 episodes ago, where we're like, okay, like there's a million F1 podcasts out there, and they are way better than us, have huge followings, P1 with Matt and Tommy, The Race, all of these different podcasts. I'm sure, Matt, you've heard some of them, right? And I listen to a lot of them, right? I listen to probably 5 or 6 F1 podcasts. So they're all doing this stuff right away, and we're trying to record 3 days later and like talk about the race. No one wants to hear it anymore. So we really made a switch to just focus on the cards, because no one else is really doing that in the F1 space. There's other podcasts that talk about cards, but not really F1. So we made a shift to that, and I think a lot of people are enjoying that. Yeah. So it's just about, as the F1 hobby grows, we're going to continue to grow with it. And, who knows, maybe we'll be at 30 listeners by the end of the year.
Well, we'll get you in there. We'll put the word out. But no, you guys are doing awesome. And there's space for everybody. Like you said, there's a lot of folks doing it, but everybody's got their own spin. They've got their own style, and you just land on what works for you. And, like Behind the Brakes, everybody out there's listening and loving it, right?
Absolutely.
Well, we really appreciate you being on, man. This has been awesome. And moving forward, I hope you continue the relationship, have you back on again, talk about things you're doing. If we can be of any help, we're definitely going to do that. But check out the show notes. Anybody listening, get in there and watch what Scott and P1Castle are doing. This stuff is incredible.
Yeah, Matt, RJ, really appreciate you guys having me on. Really looking forward to Behind the Brakes growing as well, and watching all the podcasts. I know you guys do a lot of everything, right? It's not, I'm just primarily, all I do is Formula One. So, folks that are interested in other sports and other aspects of the hobby too, I think are really going to like what you guys are doing.
I appreciate
it, man.
Yeah.
All right. We'll talk soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for listening to Behind the Brakes. We appreciate you being here with us and helping us grow this community. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, and YouTube.
Make sure to like, follow, or subscribe, and we'll see you for the next one.